Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And this particular video is specifically for police officers and anybody else who has an interest in noise pollution and its consequences. Put my eyes on here for you. First of all, I want to say to all the police officers out there how much I appreciate what you do. Thank you. Now, you may not be putting your lives at risk every single moment of the day, but you never know when that moment's going to be. From your perspective, you must feel that way. And you are putting yourselves in peril for our safety and security. Anyone who does not respect you for that and appreciate that and thank you at every opportunity really doesn't even deserve that kind of protection. Thank you so much for what you do. But, at the same time, we have to be realistic that anyone in their job can lose sight of certain aspects of what they're doing, and they may end up not doing one thing as well as they could. And in the case of police officers, when that happens, that can have consequences for the people who they are in fact protecting and serving. What I want to do here is go over what caused me to become homeless. Because as much as I hate to say it, the turning point, this has been a 10-year ordeal for me. 10 years of absolute torture. The turning point was about 5 years ago, right in the middle. And that turning point came with a police officer who just refused to comprehend what I was telling him. And I don't want to see you do that to other people. And I honestly think that most of the police officers out there don't want to do that to other people. If that officer had behaved in a different way, I might not have been living in this car for the last 5 years. Now, right now, the reason I have the leisure to make this video is because the governor of the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz, just arbitrarily dictated unconstitutionally who is essential, who is not essential, who is allowed to go out and work and earn their own living, who is not. Despite being homeless and despite having the police come up and check my ID so often, I'm a professional. And in an office of around 100 people, the performance reviews, the data clearly shows I'm the best person they've got there, or at least I was, until Governor Walz took my job away from me. I had the best performance reviews, I had perfect attendance, never get sick, haven't been sick in 25, 30 years, and I just plain did the best job. Very meticulous, very much attention to detail. But out of those 100 people, the only person who lost their job was me. And the only reason for that is because I'm the only one who could not work at home, while they could. Because I don't have a home. I'm homeless. And that brings me back again to how did I become homeless? And it's not entirely due to police officers, but they played the big role. And as I said, that turning point where I realized that my situation was absolutely hopeless 5 years ago came with the visit of a police officer who I invited into my home to protect and serve me. So what I want to do is share with you how this happened in the hopes that police officers out there will have a better understanding of what it is you're dealing with on certain calls. When you get these domestic calls, specifically in this case, noise calls. From your perspective, given what you see the darkness that a lot of us just don't have the stomach to look at. God bless you all. But you may not understand that some of that darkness may not be what it appears to be. Violations of noise ordinances and using noise as a weapon to terrorize and torture and torment your neighbors is among the most ruthless things that could be done domestically. It belongs right up there with domestic violence. It belongs right up there with home invasion. The effect on the individual is that strong. And that's what I want to demonstrate to you here. So I wrote down some notes. Let's see how quickly I can get through this for you. And again, I really appreciate all of you officers for watching this. Not just to hear what I have to say, but to learn something to help you do your jobs better. Because I'm confident that the vast majority of you have a great interest in doing just that. And I know it's not always easy for you to discern who is lying and who's telling the truth. I know you're trained in certain aspects to look for signs, body language and such that is telling that somebody's lying. I've experienced it when I talked to a detective here. I didn't really realize it till afterward, but he got really close to me. Really, really close to me, and it was kind of weird. It wasn't before coronavirus, obviously, but he got very, very close to me, and at the time I just thought, well, this is really bizarre. I mean, it isn't a normal way of, there is a normal certain distance. So anyway, the point being that officers seem to be trained in psychology, looking at body language, trying to determine things, but you know what? It's not. It's an art. It's not a science. Don't make an assumption of who you think is lying or telling the truth. You need to have evidence. Just like me as a scientist, I need to have evidence. I can't go by my gut feeling, and I can't go by some pop psychology, Norman Vincent Peale and Tim Robbins. I can't go by these people telling me, well, if you just look for someone who has an eye twitch, they're probably lying. You know what? Living in a car for 5 years, having the worst nutrition outside of a third world nation, all the other things I deal with, it causes my eye to twitch occasionally, uncontrollably. It doesn't mean I'm lying. It doesn't mean I'm a problem. I'm the least of your problems, believe me. I was brought up to believe in good citizenship, and I take great pride in being a good citizen. Whether my eye twitches, whether I give you telltale signs of whatever. I don't know. I don't want to go there because I don't know exactly what your training is on there, but I wanted to acknowledge that you have some kind of training in that. It's valuable to a degree, but not entirely. As I discovered when I called the police to help me, they just weren't understanding the severity of what I was trying to explain to them. And I can only imagine that a lot of it had to do with either my body language or the body language of the perpetrators, or they just maybe didn't realize that it's such a serious issue. So evidence is the key here, and that's what I want to focus on, objective evidence. Now, I'm homeless because no authority in the state of Minnesota would even look at, let alone consider, this evidence. When I took the evidence, in the end, I had 7,000 hours of recordings of my neighbors. And this was not like bugging the walls or anything like that. In fact, I documented exactly how the setup was. I had a professional recording studio at home. When you record in a studio, you're not trying to record the conversations in another room. You're trying to record what's going on in that room, including what is being injected forcibly into that room. And that's how I had these recordings set up. So what I recorded was what was in my living environment, whether I created it or something in my room, my apartment created it, or somebody forcibly injected it into my home, which is where you start to see the concept of home invasion. But nobody in Minnesota, not one authority from the very bottom to the very top, would even listen to the evidence I had. They refused to even look at it. They wouldn't look at any of this documentation. They wouldn't listen to the recording. They just didn't care. Yet they collected their paychecks the whole time. Ultimately, the reason I'm homeless and the reason I suffered that way for about 5 years before I became homeless, a decade now of this pain and suffering, is because these people who had a job to do collected their check, but they refused to do their job. Now, they either refused to do it or they didn't really comprehend how important something like a noise complaint can really be. Because you're seeing a lot of stuff that must certainly appear to be much, much worse. But it's not. And that's the point I want to make here. So what happened was when I moved into my apartment, it was an older building, but it was very nice and charming. It was set up wonderfully. I had a security entrance. I was on the second floor, so I didn't have to go all the way upstairs, but I wasn't in the basement. Elevated from the ground a bit. Off-street parking. laundry downstairs, a pretty decent storage space downstairs. It was a nice place. I really, really liked it, and the price was unbeatable. The rent was unbeatable. So for the first several years there, everything went fantastically, and that's when I built up this home recording studio. And, as I was trying to build that up, I never actually got to use it because of the noise my neighbors made. After a point, after 3, 4, 5 years of being there, neighbors started moving in who were, shall we say, less than civilized. And the kind of noise that they generated was so persistent and so loud and so violent that it interfered with my ability to live peaceably inside my own home. And it got progressively worse. As these people came and went, everyone who came in, only way I can describe it is the building went from being a nice building full of professionals to more or less becoming a ghetto. It got progressively worse to the point where the last people who were there, the sounds that I was subjected to, the violence, the shaking of the floor and the walls that I was subjected to you would find incomprehensible. You would ask yourself, how could anybody conceivably live in an environment like that? And yet when I was going through it, nobody paid any attention. Nobody would even listen to what I was trying to tell them, that I was living in that kind of an environment. One of the things I did when it got too bad after several years was I contacted a noise advocacy group, a national noise advocacy group. People who understand exactly what noise does to your body and your mind and your psychology. They told me to bypass the police altogether. The community where I was at had, unfortunately, a bad police department. I don't see that very often. Most police departments are very good. I've been blessed since then to encounter some fantastic police departments. This was not one of them. These officers really seemed to give you the business if you had the audacity to ask them to do something. They didn't seem to like to actually want to do anything. So if you stayed away from them, there's a chance you might not be harassed by them. But if you call them up and say, hey, I've got a problem, I need help, they're going to give you the business more than the perpetrator. This advocacy group, based on their experience nationally, told me to bypass that police department and go straight to the city council. And what they said was that the city council tells the police what to do. But in cases like this, they have encountered instances where city councils would instruct the police department, with the tenant's permission, to basically do what I was doing, for all the recording I was doing, to wire it themselves and capture the evidence that was necessary to prosecute the perpetrators, the neighbors. And that was my goal with this. Because if nobody wanted to listen to the recordings I was making as a professional studio, or at least capable studio musician, then why shouldn't the government themselves do their own recordings and determine exactly what I'm talking about? And whether my eyes twitching, or whether I'm looking down instead of in your eyes, or whatever you're using to determine whether I tell the truth or not, then you would know that I was telling the truth, because that's objective evidence. What happened instead was the police officer who came over, he really didn't want to listen to my recordings. Admittedly, I was fumbling to get them. At that time, the recordings I was making, I hadn't organized in the fashion I did later. And I was kind of fumbling to get them and to play them back, and he was just, oh man, what a waste of time. In the end, he told me I should just move away. Officers, when a citizen who is not doing anything wrong, especially inside their own home, is told that the only solution when other people are breaking the law, that the only solution is that you, the victim, turn your entire life upside down to move away from these people. You have to change your address, you have to move, pay the expense. What if you really, really like the place you're at? In my case, I would be paying at least a couple $100 more, if not $300 or $400 more a month for exactly the same type of place I was in. When you do that, you reset your credit report. It's going to take months, if not years. I had been there when I left for about 8 years. And if this hadn't happened, I would still be there today. That would be 13 years I would probably be sitting in that place. You know how good that looks on a credit report? But not if you move. Length of residency is important. There are so many things that upset your life if you have to move away. And I shouldn't have to move away because my neighbors are breaking the law. And I'm not. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. When that police officer said that, and I had made a video at the time showing my distress, that I was completely alone. There was no one I could go to. And afterwards, I did go. I went all the way up to the governor's office. Not one person cared. They just didn't care. They weren't on camera. The news media wasn't there to show their response, or I should say their utter lack of response as they collect their paychecks. Their complete lack of concern what kind of torture I was going through. When I went to the media, same thing. The media, many of those people have actually laughed out loud, facing me as I tell them what I went through. And particularly because what I talk about when I tell them what I went through has so much to do with the absolute total lack of doing their job amongst Minnesota authorities. And that's something this news media just will not reveal to the people of Minnesota, that they have a bunch of lazy bums in their government. I mean, I haven't really experienced anything good whatsoever throughout all of this. When I went to that city council again after that, I told them, that's it. If that's the best you can give me. Because when I went to the city council the first time, the police chief pulled me aside. He also did the I'm going to stand very close to you thing. I'm not sure what you're going for with that, but it's a little bizarre, just so you know. It is kind of strange. And I don't think it's necessary. But I know you're doing it for some reason. He stood right there and he said, and I quote, "It will stop. Call us the next time this happens. We'll come over there and it will stop." And instead what I got was an officer telling me, well, maybe you should move away. And after the officers left, I got abused by the people upstairs who we went to talk to. They made me pay a heavy price for calling the police, which I have the recording of the whole thing. What happened before, I have the recording continuously. What happened before the police officer's visit, where you can hear the conversation, and what happened afterwards. This is called objective evidence. And yet, look what happened to me. When I went to that city council, I told them they have a problem with their police department, and I knew about this before. It was pretty much common knowledge. This police department did not like to be bothered by citizens asking them to do anything, such as their job. And one of the problems with that is when you have people who are in a domestic situation that is violent like this is violence. If they're not getting the help they need, their lives are in peril. And what happened? 6 months later after that, a neighbor who had been tortured, terrorized, and tormented by his neighbor, just like I had been for so long, he had repeatedly called the police and they blew him off until this neighbor finally shot him dead and shot his girlfriend, almost killed her. 6 months after I raised all these issues, nobody listened to what I was saying. His name was Todd Stevens, New Brighton, Minnesota. Look it up. He didn't have to die. And I didn't have to end up living in this car for 5 years and basically have the rest of my life destroyed. So let me tell you the things about noise that you might need to know so that you can recognize what the severity of the problem when people call you up with noise complaints. Now, first of all, I want to note that there are noise ordinances on the books in pretty much every community, at county level, state level in some cases. There are noise ordinances, and you have to ask the question, why would those exist if there wasn't a problem? Because everyone was telling me there's no problem. Oh, Paul, you're hypersensitive to noise. They just blame the victim. That's all they did. Blame the victim. Blame the victim. Why are all these ordinances on the books if noise isn't a problem? People are just hypersensitive to it. Well, hi, sorry, while editing I realized I left out a couple of important points along these same lines. The state of Minnesota spends tens of millions of dollars on noise barriers along roads, particularly along highways. Why would they spend tens of millions of tax dollars on that if they did not deem that noise was some kind of a problem, some kind of a disturbance that requires a solution? What about amusement parks? Roller coasters, those big tubes that hold up the roller coasters, they're filled with sand. Why is that? Because they receive so many noise complaints from neighbors with these cars going around the roller coasters that they had to do something about the noise. It was disturbing the neighbors. So they changed the whole way that they build roller coasters as a result of that. Why would they do that if noise was not a problem that disturbed people? The government dictates when airports may operate and in which directions planes may fly. And the reason is because of the noise. Why would they do that if noise is not a problem? Are the people just hypersensitive to those jet engines flying a couple feet above their head overnight? I had neighbors who were making more noise, when you look at the decibel meter, more noise than a jet engine a couple hundred feet from my head, and yet nobody cared. Government spends money improving roads and railroad crossings. They do that to reduce the amount of time that railroads have to spend laying on their horns. Why would they do that? Because the horns disturb people. Noise causes problems for people, especially inside their homes. I just needed to insert that. Thank you. As soon as I became homeless, I got a hotel because I had to try to figure out what my life was at this point. Because I had lost my job at the same time. They had, for reasons unrelated, new president had nuked a whole bunch of people with no warning. So I was a walking dead man. So I got a hotel just to try to survive. And one of the things I did was create a website. On this website, which I think was, to this day, it's now defunct, but I think it was the best website on the effects of noise as a weapon in domestic situations. I think it was the best site that existed on the entire web, anywhere. And believe me, I had gone through everywhere. I had spoken or chatted with the experts. I had read all the scientific studies. Among other things, my website explained in detail what happened to me over all those times. It went over each neighbor individually, the type of noise they made, their response to me when I asked them very politely to not do it, and tried to explain to them the impact it had on me. These were rotten, terrible people. They were just bad people. That's why they continued doing it, or made it worse after I asked them to stop. These were not good people. They were the problem, not me. I went over how my landlord blew the whole thing off. He blamed the victim. That's all he did. You're hypersensitive to noise. He refused to listen to the evidence. He refused. He came over a couple of times, but the noise comes and goes. It isn't like it goes on 24 hours a day. And when I call him up, he lives somewhere else. By the time he got there a half hour, an hour later, the noise had stopped for the 4 or 5 minutes that he stood there. I even invited him one time to spend the night. I said, you spend the night over here and experience what I experienced in the middle of the night when I'm trying to sleep and someone drops a refrigerator on the ceiling repeatedly throughout much of the night. And he just, no way am I doing that. He didn't care. Eventually, he performed what's called a constructive eviction. He told me to leave. That's illegal. He had no grounds for that. I was the best tenant he had by far. Always paid my rent on time, respected my neighbors, took care of his property, improved his property at my expense. I was the best neighbor the best tenant you could ever ask for. And yet, I'm the one he got rid of, not the rotten monsters. But again, he didn't live there, did he? See, when it happens to other people, it doesn't matter. What they were doing, on my website, I showed how, given the way that my recordings were set up, everything I was recording was what was in my home, my living space. And I wasn't creating it, so it was being injected into my home from outside. That's equivalent to a home invasion, once you realize the danger that comes with the noise that was being injected into my home. I linked to many scientific studies, scientific journals, entire journals that are devoted to noise, the effects of noise on human beings. Why would those exist if noise wasn't a problem? I had graphs, I had charts, I had definitions all over the place. I showed the history of how noise has been weaponized. Go back to Jericho. Remember what happened with Jericho? The Israelites, God told the Israelites to basically make a lot of noise and surround the city for many days, and then the walls fell down. A more contemporary version would be Waco, Texas, the Waco Massacre. Maybe you don't know it because they don't put it on TV, but if you study the reality, you would know it. One of the things the government did to those people after cutting off their power, their water, basically imprisoning them, besieging them inside their own home, they put up huge speakers and they blared horrifying noises, just things that terrify you all through the night in that darkness while they didn't have any light. Music, they blared bad music. That song, These Boots Are Made for Walking, by Nancy Sinatra. And one of the lines in there says something like, I just found a new book of matches, and one of these days I'm going to burn you. Something like that. This was before the fire that they started. You wonder why those people in that home made some bad decisions? Maybe it wasn't so much to do with David Koresh. Maybe it was because they were being tortured by that noise. But you would know that if you just watch television. Remember, the news media here laughed in my face when I asked for their help. That's the kind of news media you have in Minnesota. I showed what happens scientifically, what happens to your body and to your mind. Automatically. These are physiological, automatic responses to noise. Loud noises, soft noises, droning noises, noises at the low frequency, noises at the high frequency. It's all different. It has different impact on your body, on the cells. It has a different impact on your mind and what's going on in your ability to think and to concentrate, your ability to focus, your ability to sleep. I had demonstrations all over the place of me sleeping. Video of me sleeping. You can just see me there, and then boom! And I wake up in a start. My heart's beating. That's called objective evidence, something that nobody would look at. And again, I showed how noise had been weaponized by our military since the beginning. Noise is always considered a weapon. You're familiar with it. Those noise machines that go out there to disperse crowds. If noise isn't a problem, why do you have one of those? What's that for? If noise can't hurt anybody. I went over the science of acoustics and sound transmission, how sound transmits through different mediums, how sound reverberates throughout a room. Once it's injected into my home, it's going to bounce back and forth within my home. It's called reverberation. I went over all the science of that and showed exactly what was happening. I went over ADSR envelope. That's attack, decay, sustain, release. Any kind of a sound. You have like a drum hit. There's an attack, which is that initial spike that it could be quiet or it could be loud. After you hit it, it decays a bit and it sustains and then it releases, it goes away. Those unique envelopes are the difference between this sound and this sound. I showed, and this one really should have grabbed people, but for some reason it didn't. I think it's because nobody really cared about what I was going through. I showed how, and this was a good year of research on this, children and adults who have been kidnapped and held hostage and terrorized. More often than anything else, the thing that they remember later, the thing that triggers trauma in them for the rest of their lives, was sound. Noise. while they're there imprisoned in their cell or wherever, their basement. That creep in Austria who kidnapped his daughter and put her in the basement as a sex slave for like 30 years. What sticks in their mind is the sound. When she would hear that lock open up, it just triggers terror like you can't even imagine. Because she knows what's coming. She's about to get raped again by her father. Sound is something that sticks with you for the rest of your life. And as I go through and I listen to these recordings, I just get it all back again. I start shaking, my heart starts beating, and I'm going to have that for the rest of my life because of what these people did to me. I showed how the trauma that these people experienced, people who were kidnapped and held hostage, how the trauma, as they describe it themselves, was consistently almost equivalent to exactly what I had described to the city council, the police, and all these people. And nobody cared. Yet when someone gets kidnapped and they're held hostage, especially if it's a child, all of a sudden they seem to care a whole lot. Why didn't they care about me? I was experiencing the same type of thing. And I showed how in these true crime documentaries, when you look over these things and they have all the interviews with district attorneys, prosecutors, police officers, one of the things you hear most often of all, if there's any one theme that is repeated throughout all these true crime documentaries, it is this. It is people saying something along the lines of, your home is the one place where you should feel safe and secure at all times. Your home is your refuge. And yet when I tried to tell people that, and tried to tell the police officers and the city council and all these government officials, up to the state attorney general, governor's office, nobody cared. Nobody cared. Why are they saying that in all these true crime documentaries? Are they lying? Are they consistently saying something that has no meaning whatsoever, which doesn't seem like very good writing or production for a popular genre of show? Maybe what they're saying is perfectly accurate, and nobody listened to a word I said when I tried to tell them that I was being tortured, terrorized, and tormented inside my home. And the solution isn't for me to move away, especially in a lawless state that does nothing about it, because I could go through all of that expense and hassle of moving, resetting my credit to zero, and then end up in exactly the same situation because nobody does anything about noisy neighbors. That makes no rational sense. And for people to suggest that that was the solution was lunacy. And I hope as police officers you will never, ever insult a victim's intelligence by making that suggestion to them. The perpetrator should be punished, not the victim. The perpetrator should be blamed, not the victim. At this time, I'm preparing to re-release an electronic drum kit. This drum kit is made up exclusively out of the sounds that were injected into my home by my neighbors. Let me give you a quick sample of on a drum machine here of what this sounds like. These are sounds that were injected into my home that I had to listen to off and on 24 hours a day for years. I had 7,000 hours of recordings of that, because that is what my environment was filled with. Those weren't sounds generated inside my home by me. I tiptoed around my room. I was taught that as a child to show respect for other people inside the building. They were not. Here, in fact, here's a beat. I'll just throw together a quick. I'm being stared at. You see, this is the kind of nonsense I have to deal with. This is the kind of creepiness I have to deal with. living in this car. It has housed people like that who walk in an empty parking lot. They walk right next to my car and just stare at me with the rubberneck thing as he walks by. How am I not supposed to feel intimidated by that? I'm not bothering anybody. I'm making a video for the police as that housed person walks by and puts me through that, such that I feel the need to make sure my doors are locked. This is what I've gone through because, among other people, the police didn't take what I said seriously. What I was getting at a moment ago is that I'm just going to put together a quick beat and show you how you can turn these noises into a drum set. Officers, I'm here to tell you right now, if my neighbors did not make that kind of noise, I couldn't have made that drum set. I could have made it out of other things. I could have come out to my car. I'm making another drum set out of what I call noise from the car. Things like this. Those are just sounds, though. Those aren't things that enter from outside and terrorize me throughout the day and the night. Noise is a very, very serious problem. It has a dramatic impact on your mental state, your physiological state. It is involuntary. When someone comes out of nowhere when you don't expect it and all of a sudden it makes your heart jump. You think those lie detector tests are detecting subtle changes in your body? Try one of those lie detector tests and come up behind them and go, "Boo!" and see what happens on it. And yet they blame the victim as if it's my fault that those readings go sky high. It's called involuntary response. It's a defense mechanism against a threat. It's called fight or flight. It's a way that we are supposed to save our lives. And yet nobody, including the police, took it seriously when I told them that I was living in this heightened state of endorphins flowing through my body 24/7 inside my home, where I should be the most relaxed of all. And it was all because my neighbors were invading my home and attacking me for years, and nobody did anything about it. And the more people refused to do anything about it, the more hopeless my situation became. By the end of this, I was literally... I'm a professional, a well-educated, extremely competent, meticulous, responsible professional, reliable. By the end of this, I was literally laying on the floor in my bedroom, curled up in the fetal position. That's how bad this was. I had to stop using my kitchen. I had to stop using, I had some gym equipment in the living room. In fact, I'm going to show you a video. I'll dig out a video and show you right before I moved to Minnesota. This was taken about a month before I moved to Minnesota, my last show with my band in San Diego. Take a look at the physical condition I was in at the time. I was built like an Olympian at that time, and I maintained that through exercise at home for several years until these neighbors became so abusive and so violent that I could no longer go out into my living room because that's where the noise was the worst. I had to stop using that health equipment. My body went Just went to hell from there. It was so bad that after a couple years of no longer exercising, I just went to a picnic at work and I went out and played frisbee. I dived for a frisbee and fell on the ground, rolled just like I normally would, and yet, I don't know if you can even see what it did. It dislocated my shoulder. I don't know if you can see it. Dislocated my shoulder completely so that I could never again lift those kinds of weights without ripping my shoulder apart. And yet, I was in that good a physical condition before these people made all that noise. This would not have happened just diving for a frisbee, something I've done my whole life. Knowing how to roll properly, it wouldn't have happened. I couldn't use my bathroom anymore. Only in extreme circumstances, when I really had to go, could I go to my bathroom. That meant I didn't shower as often as I used to, and it meant that my dental hygiene suffered tremendously, something that has been totally exacerbated by being homeless in this car. All my teeth are now rotted, up top and bottom. All my teeth are rotted. They're going to be gone. My teeth were perfectly fine before these neighbors started making the noise and made my bathroom a living hell. My life was completely destroyed by this, and all I ever asked anyone to do was A, the right thing, and B, their job, the one they accept a paycheck for doing. I asked them to enforce our lease. I asked my landlord to enforce our lease, which had a big paragraph about how you cannot interfere with your neighbors' enjoyment of their home, specifically when it comes to noise. He refused to do it. He refused to do it. And that man walks free today for all the suffering I've endured, even after he broke the law himself with a constructive eviction. All these neighbors who made all this noise, they've just walked free. You know what? There was one of the neighbors, one of the very worst, probably left about a year before I became homeless. I just called her Muffy. Who knows what her name was? Just a nasty, rotten little girl. Just a foul, foul human being. When she finally left, it was only a couple months later. It was the Star Tribune or the Pioneer Press in the legal section where they had this legal advice from some attorney. Someone wrote in and said, I had this neighbor move in upstairs and she makes this noise. And they went on to describe exactly what Muffy did to me. He said he went and spoke to her very nicely and asked her to try to keep the noise down, exactly like I did. The response he got from this person was exactly what I got from this girl, which was that she just looked at me and she just shut the door slowly, and then she went and gave me the business. Went and started banging and pounding even worse than ever. Everything in there he described sounded exactly like the neighbor I had who had tortured me for so long, who had just moved away a couple months before. And what did this attorney tell them in the newspaper? Maybe you should move away. Nobody is standing up against these perpetrators. Is it any wonder that they keep perpetrating? My neighbors walk free, and all those government officials who collect their paychecks all the way up from the very bottom to the top, governor, attorney general, all of these attorneys I went to for help who just felt that there was no money in it for them, and it would only be dealing with the difference between right and wrong, saving a life versus letting a life be destroyed. There's no money in that. They're walking around free and clear. No consequences. Officers, this is a case study in the definition of injustice. This is wrong. It never should have happened to me. I never asked for it. I never did anything to deserve it. And I followed the proper chain of command all the way through, trying to find a remedy for it. And nobody would do their job to make this torture stop. And now I've had my entire life destroyed. And with those 5 years of being homeless, the first 2 years I couldn't work, because it's illegal for us to apply for a job, fill out tax forms. In case you weren't aware, homeless people have to commit perjury, a felony, if we put in any address at all, because we don't have an address on all those forms. This wonderful family took me into their home briefly, and while I was there, I could have enough residents where I went out and got the job. I kept that job for 3 years. I was their best performer. Best performance reviews, best reviews from the customers that we served, perfect attendance, never got sick. You couldn't ask for a better employee. Absolutely, totally reliable. And then what happens? Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, with the stroke of a pen, says you have to stay at home. All of those other 99 people I worked with could work from home, but I can't. So I'm the only one who had to lose my job. And look at this person coming up behind me once again, right next to my car. Right next to my car out of an entire empty parking lot. This is what I have to deal with, officers. Why do I have to deal with this? Why? Why do I have to deal with this? You didn't see that guy just staring at me with a rubberneck out of this entire empty parking lot. Why do I have to deal with this? What did I do wrong? That I have to be on the lookout for people like that causing me harm inside my new home. Officers, you can help prevent this kind of thing from happening to other people. Please, take noise complaints seriously. Give them the gravity that they deserve. If it can be weaponized for warfare, not just weaponized, but basically just make noise. You don't need Oppenheimer and Einstein to turn noise into a weapon. You just have to make noise. You might have to understand some of the psychology of which noise is more disturbing than others. Officers, when someone gives you a noise complaint, don't sit there and look for whether their eyebrows twitching or if they're not looking at you, they're looking down or something. That doesn't mean anything. The state of the condition I was in when these people were torturing and terrorizing me, I might have looked like Beaker from the Muppet Show, just for all I know. I had no control over my own bodily functions by that point. And if that's all you're paying attention to, you're missing what's really going on. Look at the evidence. And if you don't have the evidence, then put a microphone in that person's home and gather the evidence. I have had, so far, 10 years of my life stolen from me because of this. A decade of my life stolen from me. My parents died early on after I moved to Minnesota. I have no family. Another reason I'm stuck here. Let me ask you this. If I could find an attorney who actually cared about right and wrong and righting an injustice, how many millions of dollars would the state of Minnesota have to pay me to compensate for losing 10 years of my life? And frankly, the trauma that I've gotten from this is going to stay with me for the rest of my life if I live another 50 years. How many millions of dollars could they give me that's going to compensate for that? This never should have happened in the first place. It never should have happened. And at the middle of that 10-year period, the straw that broke the camel's back was a police officer who refused to listen to what I was saying or to listen to my objective evidence. I really hope this helps you understand that when people call you up for help, yes, I understand there's a lot of frivolous nature to many of those calls. I understand that you have to decide when you get there, did the person who called, are they really the perpetrator? I understand that you have to make those discernments, and it's not always easy. But when it comes to noise complaints, it's really simple matter. You just have to determine, is the noise happening? Because if the noise is happening, these consequences to your physiology and your mental state, they just happen naturally. You can't stop them. If those people are violating noise ordinances, they need to be held accountable and punished. They need to be stopped. Because what they're doing is wielding a weapon that, in the end, can cause more harm than a loaded gun. These people destroyed my entire life, probably for the rest of my entire life. Personally, I consider that the equivalent of murder. But to date, nobody has even talked to my landlord. No one's even given him a funny look for what he did to me. No one's done any of that for those neighbors who tortured and terrorized and tormented me inside my home. Officers, again, I appreciate so much what you do for us, and I sure hope everyone else out there does as well. You lay it all on the line for us, I'm trying to do the same thing by making videos like this. I really appreciate everything you do, and I'm very grateful to the many police officers who have been very understanding and respectful of me while I'm in this situation when they have to come up and do this. I truly am grateful that you treat me like a human being, really more than anyone else does. I'll never be able to repay you for that courtesy. I hope this video, to help you do your job better, goes at least some small way toward doing that. Thank you again, and thank you for watching.